When my son Marcus brought his wife Jennifer home for the first time 7 years ago, I thought I had gained a daughter. I was so wrong. What I had actually done was open my door to a woman who would spend the next 7 years calculating exactly how much my life was worth in dollars and cents. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, because this story needs to be told properly. My name is Dorothy, and at 73 years old, I thought I had seen everything life could throw at me. I raised 3 children as a single mother after my husband died in a construction accident when Marcus was only 12. I worked double shifts at the hospital as a nursing assistant, cleaned offices on weekends, and did whatever it took to keep food on the table and clothes on their backs. By the time I retired, I had managed to save enough money to buy a small house and live comfortably. Not wealthy, mind you, but comfortable. Marcus was my youngest, and I'll admit, probably my favorite. He was the one who stayed close to home while his sisters moved across the country for their careers. He was the one who called me every Sunday, who remembered my birthday, who seemed to genuinely care about his old mother. So when he met Jennifer, a beautiful young woman with a bright smile and ambitious dreams, I was thrilled for him. The first warning sign should have been how quickly she assessed everything in my house. While Marcus was in the bathroom during that first visit, Jennifer walked around my living room with the calculating eyes of an appraiser. She touched my grandmother's china cabinet, examined the vintage jewelry I had displayed, and asked pointed questions about my retirement savings and whether I owned my house outright. At the time, I thought she was just being friendly, trying to understand the family she was joining. How naive I was. Within 6 months of their marriage, the visits started following a predictable pattern. They would arrive with warm hugs and stories about their week, but within an hour, the conversation would somehow shift to their financial struggles. Jennifer had student loans that were crushing them. Marcus's job at the warehouse didn't pay enough for the lifestyle they wanted. They needed a bigger apartment because Jennifer was embarrassed to have friends over to their current place. Always something. The first time they asked for money, I didn't hesitate. $500 to help with Jennifer's student loan payment. It felt good to be able to help my son and his new wife get on their feet. The second time, it was $1,000 for a security deposit on a better apartment. Then, $1,500 for a car repair that couldn't wait. Each time, they promised to pay me back, and each time, I told them not to worry about it. Family helps family, I said. That's what love looks like. But something strange started happening. The more money I gave them, the less they seemed to actually like me. The warm hugs became perfunctory. The Sunday phone calls became monthly, then sporadic. When they did visit, they spent most of their time on their phones or watching television, barely engaging in conversation, unless it was to drop hints about their latest financial crisis. Jennifer developed an especially cruel habit of commenting on everything I owned. She would pick up my mother's silver serving tray and say things like, "This is pretty, but it's just sitting here collecting dust. You could probably get some money for it." She would look through my jewelry box and suggest I sell pieces I never wore anymore. She even had the audacity to comment on my house, saying it was too big for one person and that I should consider downsizing to something more practical. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday evening in November. I had been battling a particularly bad case of the flu for a week, barely able to get out of bed. I hadn't heard from Marcus or Jennifer during my illness, which hurt, but I tried not to take it personally. They were young and busy with their own lives. But when my doorbell rang that evening, I dragged myself out of bed, hoping to see their concerned faces. Instead, I found them standing on my porch with barely concealed impatience. They didn't ask how I was feeling or offer to help with anything. Jennifer brushed past me into the house, while Marcus followed, both of them dripping rainwater onto my clean floors. "Mom, we need to talk," Marcus said, without even taking off his coat. "We've got a situation." I invited them to sit down, offered them something warm to drink, but they remained standing in my living room like they were conducting business. Jennifer pulled out her phone and started scrolling through what looked like financial documents. "We found the perfect house," she announced, not looking up from her screen. "It's in Riverside Heights. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, perfect for starting a family. The problem is, we need someone to co-sign the mortgage." My heart sank. I had co-signed for things before. A car loan here and there, always with family members who I trusted. But a house was different. A house was a 30-year commitment, a massive financial responsibility. "How much are we talking about?" I asked, settling into my favorite armchair because the flu was making me dizzy. "250,000, Marcus said, as if it were nothing more than pocket change. The number hit me like a physical blow. $250,000. More money than I had ever seen in one place. More than my house was worth. More than I could ever hope to pay back if something went wrong. "That's a lot of money," I said carefully. "What happens if you can't make the payments?" Jennifer finally looked up from her phone, and the expression on her face was one I had never seen before. Cold, calculating, almost predatory. "That's not going to happen," she said sharply. "Marcus has a good job, and I'm starting my new position at the marketing firm next month. We've run all the numbers. We can afford this. But what if something unexpected happens?" I pressed. "What if one of you loses your job? What if you get sick? What if the economy changes?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably, but Jennifer's expression hardened even further. "Mom," Marcus said, using that patronizing tone he had developed over the past few years, "we're not kids anymore. We know what we're doing. This is our chance to build equity instead of throwing money away on rent." I sat there in my nightgown, still weak from being sick, looking at my son and his wife, and I felt something inside me break. Not my heart exactly, but something deeper. The illusion that I was part of a loving family had finally shattered completely. "I need to think about it," I said quietly. Jennifer's mask slipped completely then. The fake smile disappeared, replaced by barely controlled anger. "Think about what?" she snapped. "This is your son we're talking about. Your own flesh and blood. What kind of mother wouldn't help her child buy his first home? The kind who has already given you thousands of dollars over the years, without seeing a penny returned," I replied, my voice growing stronger despite my illness. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus looked genuinely shocked, as if he had never considered that all those small gifts and loans might add up to something significant. But Jennifer's reaction was pure rage. "Those weren't loans," she said through gritted teeth. "Those were gifts. You gave us that money freely. You can't hold that over our heads now." "I'm not holding anything over your heads," I said, struggling to my feet. "I'm simply saying that co-signing a $250,000 mortgage is a huge responsibility, and I need time to consider it properly." Jennifer stood up so abruptly that she knocked over the coffee table, sending my grandmother's teacup crashing to the floor. "You know what your problem is," she said, her voice rising to a near shout. "You're selfish. You're a bitter old woman who can't stand to see anyone else happy. You've got all this money just sitting there doing nothing, and you won't help the people who actually matter." Marcus finally found his voice. "Jennifer, that's enough." But she was just getting started. She pointed a manicured finger at me, her face flushed with anger. "You want to know the truth? We only come here because Marcus feels sorry for you. You think we enjoy sitting in this dusty old house, listening to you complain about your aches and pains? You think we actually want to spend our weekends with someone who has nothing interesting to say about anything?" Each word was like a knife, precise and calculated to cause maximum damage. But she wasn't finished. "The only reason we put up with you is because we thought you actually cared about Marcus's future. But apparently, we were wrong. You'd rather hoard your money like some kind of dragon than help your own son achieve his dreams." I looked at Marcus, hoping to see some sign that he disagreed with his wife's assessment, some indication that he still saw me as more than just a potential source of funding. But he was staring at the floor, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Is that how you feel too?" I asked him quietly. He looked up then, and I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before. Resentment. Deep, long simmering resentment. "Mom, you have to understand our position," he said. "We're trying to build a life together. We're trying to plan for the future. And every time we need help, you make us jump through hoops, like we're asking for charity instead of family support." The word charity stung more than anything else he could have said. After all the years of sacrifice, all the double shifts and weekend jobs, all the times I had gone without so they could have what they needed, my own son saw my help as charity. Jennifer must have seen something change in my expression because she pressed her advantage. "Face it, Dorothy," she said, using my first name like a weapon. "What good are you to anyone if you're not going to help? You don't have grandchildren to spoil. You don't have exciting stories to tell. You don't cook interesting food or throw fun parties. The only thing you bring to this family is your money, and if you're not going to share that, then what's the point?" The room fell silent, except for the sound of rain hitting the windows. I stood there in my nightgown, looking at these two people I had loved and supported for years, and I realized that Jennifer was right about one thing. I finally understood exactly what I meant to them. To them. "If that's how you really feel," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "then I think this conversation is over." Jennifer crossed her arms and smirked. "Good. At least now we're being honest with each other." But I wasn't finished. Something had shifted inside me during her cruel speech. Something that had been building for years, without me even realizing it. The fog of unconditional love and blind generosity was finally lifting, and I was seeing the situation with crystal clarity for the first time. "You're absolutely right, Jennifer," I said, and both of them looked surprised by my calm tone. "I don't have much to offer besides my money, and if that's all you want from me, then you should know that well is officially dry." Marcus stepped forward, panic flickering across his features. "Mom, let's not say things we can't take back." "Oh, I'm not taking anything back," I replied, walking to my front door and opening it wide. The cold November rain swept into my living room, but I didn't care. "I'm finally seeing things clearly. You want honesty? Here's some honesty for you. I've spent the last 7 years funding your lifestyle while you've treated me like an inconvenience. I've given you thousands of dollars that I worked my entire life to save. And in return, you've given me nothing but contempt and disrespect." Jennifer grabbed her purse and headed toward the door, but she couldn't resist one final shot. "You'll change your mind. You always do, because without us, you really don't have anyone else." She paused in the doorway, rain soaking her expensive jacket, and delivered her final blow with the casual cruelty of someone who had been planning it for a long time. You know what, Dorothy? Maybe you should just hurry up and die already. At least then, your money could actually do some good instead of sitting in your account, making you feel important. The words hung in the air like poison gas. Marcus's face went white, and he opened his mouth to say something, but Jennifer was already walking to their car. He looked back at me once, shame and anger warring in his expression, but he followed his wife without a word. I stood in my doorway, watching their taillights disappear into the rainy night, and for the first time in 7 years, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. Pure, overwhelming relief. The performance was finally over. The pretense of family love and mutual respect had been stripped away, leaving only the ugly truth underneath. I closed the door, locked it, and walked back to my living room. My grandmother's broken teacup lay scattered across the hardwood floor, but I didn't clean it up right away. Instead, I sat down in my armchair and really looked at my house for the first time in years. Not through Jennifer's calculating eyes or Marcus's embarrassed glances, but through my own eyes. This was my home. I had worked 2 jobs for 30 years to pay for every piece of furniture, every decoration, every improvement. The walls held memories of birthday parties and holiday dinners, of homework sessions at the kitchen table, and bedtime stories read on the couch. This house represented decades of sacrifice and determination, and I had been allowing 2 ungrateful people to make me feel ashamed of it. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called my oldest daughter, Patricia, who lived in Seattle with her family. We had grown distant over the years, partly because of geography, but mostly because I had been so focused on Marcus and his problems that I had neglected my relationship with her. "Mom?" she answered on the second ring, and I could hear the concern in her voice. "Is everything okay? You never call this early." "I'm fine, sweetheart," I said, and realized that for the first time in a long while, it was true. "I just wanted to hear your voice." We talked for 2 hours. Really talked. Not the surface-level conversations I had been having with Marcus and Jennifer. Patricia told me about her job at the nonprofit where she worked with homeless families. She shared stories about my grandchildren's school plays and soccer games. She asked about my health, my friends, my interests, as if I were a real person with a life worth knowing about. When I finally told her about what had happened with Marcus and Jennifer, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Mom," she said finally, "I'm so sorry. I had no idea things had gotten that bad. Why didn't you ever say anything about them?" I asked. Patricia sighed. "I tried to, a few times over the years, but you always defended them, and I didn't want to cause family drama. I figured you knew what you were doing." "I didn't," I admitted. "I was so afraid of losing Marcus that I let them walk all over me. I thought if I just gave them enough money, enough support, they would love me the way I loved them." "Mom, love isn't something you can buy, and anyone who makes you pay for their affection isn't worth having in your life." After we hung up, I made another call, this time to my middle daughter, Susan, in Denver. The conversation was similar, full of warmth and genuine interest in my well-being. Both of my daughters invited me to visit, offered to help me plan trips, suggested activities we could do together. It was like discovering I had family I had forgotten about. Over the next week, I didn't hear from Marcus or Jennifer at all. Part of me kept expecting them to call, maybe with an apology, or at least an attempt to smooth things over. But my phone remained silent, and gradually I realized they were probably waiting for me to make the first move. They expected me to come crawling back, apologizing for my unreasonable behavior and offering to co-sign their mortgage after all. Instead, I spent the week taking care of myself. I went to the doctor for a proper flu treatment. I cleaned my house thoroughly, including the broken teacup that I had left on the floor, as a reminder of that terrible night. I went grocery shopping and bought ingredients for meals I actually wanted to eat, not just whatever was cheapest or easiest. Most importantly, I made an appointment with my financial advisor, something I hadn't done in over 2 years, because Marcus and Jennifer's constant requests for money had made me afraid to look too closely at my accounts. "Mrs. Johnson," Mr. Peterson said as he reviewed my files, "I have to ask, have you been making large withdrawals over the past few years? Your savings account has decreased significantly." I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment as I calculated the total amount I had given to Marcus and Jennifer. Between the direct gifts, the payments I had made on their behalf, and the smaller amounts I had pressed into their hands during visits, the number was staggering. "About $12,000, I admitted. Mr. Peterson's eyebrows rose. "That's a significant amount. Was this for a specific investment or purchase?" I was helping my son and his wife," I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "I see. And they've been paying you back?" I shook my head, feeling foolish. It was supposed to be gifts, family support. Mr. Peterson nodded diplomatically, but I could see the concern in his expression. "Mrs. Johnson, I want you to know that your retirement savings are still in good shape overall. But at the rate of withdrawal you've been maintaining, you could face some challenges in your later years." The meeting was a wake-up call. I had been so focused on Marcus and Jennifer's immediate wants that I had completely ignored my own long-term security. What would happen if I needed expensive medical care? What if my house required major repairs? What if I simply lived longer than my money lasted? For the first time, I understood that my refusal to co-sign their mortgage wasn't just about protecting myself from their potential failure to pay. It was about protecting my future, my independence, my ability to take care of myself without becoming a burden on anyone else. 2 weeks after that horrible night, I was in my kitchen making breakfast when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Marcus's name, and my heart skipped a beat. Despite everything that had happened, despite the cruel things they had said, part of me still hoped that my son would call to apologize, to try to rebuild our relationship. "Hello, Marcus," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Mom." His voice sounded strained, almost panicked. "We need to talk." "I'm listening. It's about the house. The one in Riverside Heights. We put in an offer, and it was accepted. But now the bank is asking questions about the cosigner situation." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "Well, we might have told them that you had already agreed to cosign, and we might have used your name and some of your financial information on the preliminary application." The kitchen seemed to spin around me. "You did what?" "It's not a big deal," he said quickly. "We just needed to get our foot in the door. The real estate market is so competitive right now, but now they want to verify everything, and they're asking for your signature on the actual loan documents." I sat down heavily at my kitchen table, my breakfast forgotten. "Marcus, what you're describing sounds like fraud." "It's not fraud," he protested. "We knew you'd come around eventually. We just moved the timeline up a little bit. You forged my signature?" "We didn't forge anything. We just used the information we had to get pre-approved. Look, Mom, this is happening whether you like it or not. The sellers have already accepted our offer. We've put down earnest money. If you don't sign these papers, we're going to lose everything." The manipulation was breathtaking in its audacity. They had essentially forced me into a corner, using my name and credit without permission, and now they were demanding that I make it legal retroactively. What if I refuse? I asked. The silence on the other end of the line was telling. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice had taken on a threatening tone I had never heard before. Mom, if you refuse to sign, we'll lose our earnest money, our credit will be destroyed, and we'll probably get sued by the sellers. Is that really what you want? Do you really want to ruin your son's life over your stubborn pride? I realized then that this conversation was Jennifer's idea, probably scripted by her from beginning to end. My son had become a puppet, delivering lines written by someone who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to overcome. I need to think about this, I said. There's nothing to think about. Marcus exploded. The papers need to be signed by 5 o'clock today, or the deal falls through. 5 o'clock today. The ultimate deadline. The final pressure tactic. I understood now that this entire crisis had been manufactured to force my hand, to make me feel like I had no choice but to comply with their demands. Then, I guess the deal falls through, I said quietly, and hung up the phone. My hands were shaking as I set the receiver back in its cradle. What they had done was more than just manipulation or emotional blackmail. They had used my personal information without my consent, potentially exposing me to legal liability I had never agreed to take on. Within minutes, my phone started ringing again. Marcus called 3 more times, each message more desperate than the last. Then Jennifer called, her voice switching between fake sweetness and barely contained rage. They left voicemails threatening everything from cutting me out of their lives forever to pursuing legal action against me for emotional distress. I turned off my phone and sat in the quiet of my kitchen, feeling something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Real, genuine peace. No more walking on eggshells around people who saw me as a bank account with legs. No more pretending their visits brought me joy when they only brought demands. No more sacrificing my own security for people who had just proven they would lie, cheat, and steal to get what they wanted. That afternoon, I did something I should have done years ago. I called my bank and asked to speak with someone about protecting my accounts and credit. The customer service representative was incredibly helpful, explaining how I could place alerts on my credit report to prevent anyone from opening accounts or taking out loans in my name without my explicit consent. Mrs. Johnson, the banker said, I have to ask, do you have reason to believe someone might try to use your information inappropriately? Unfortunately, yes, I replied. Family members have already attempted to use my name on a mortgage application without my permission. I'm so sorry to hear that. Family financial abuse is more common than people realize. Let me set up some additional protections for you. Within an hour, my credit was locked down tighter than Fort Knox. Any attempt to use my information for loans, credit cards, or major purchases would trigger immediate alerts and require my personal appearance at the bank with multiple forms of identification. The next morning brought a surprise visitor. I was watering my plants on the front porch when a well-dressed woman in her 30s approached with a clipboard and a professional smile. Good morning, she said. Are you Mrs. Dorothy Johnson? I am. I'm Sandra Martinez from First National Bank. I'm here about the mortgage application that was submitted with you as a co-signer. My blood pressure spiked, but I kept my voice calm. I never submitted any mortgage application. Sandra's professional smile faltered slightly. I see. Well, we have an application here with your signature and financial information. for a $250,000 mortgage for Marcus and Jennifer Johnson. The loan is supposed to close this Friday. That signature is not mine, I said firmly, and I never gave permission for my information to be used. Sandra made several notes on her clipboard, her expression growing more serious. Mrs. Johnson, if what you're telling me is accurate, this could constitute mortgage fraud, which is a federal crime. The words hung in the air between us like a thunderclap. Mortgage fraud, federal crime. My own son and his wife had committed a federal crime using my identity. What happens now? I asked. Well, first, we'll need you to come to the bank to make a formal statement. We'll also need to contact the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. This type of fraud is taken very seriously. I agreed to come to the bank that afternoon. As Sandra walked back to her car, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and satisfaction. Sadness that it had come to this, that my own family had pushed things so far, that law enforcement was now involved, but also satisfaction that their scheme had finally unraveled. At the bank, I spent 2 hours with Sandra and her supervisor, going through every detail of what had happened. They showed me the mortgage application, and seeing my forged signature was like looking at a betrayal written in black ink. The signature was close, but not quite right. Jennifer had clearly practiced, but she wasn't a professional forger. Mrs. Johnson, Sandra's supervisor, Mr. Williams, said as we concluded the meeting, I want you to know that you've done the right thing by coming forward. Unfortunately, we see this type of family financial abuse more often than we'd like. What will happen to them? I asked. That's up to the federal prosecutors. But mortgage fraud carries serious penalties, including potential prison time and substantial fines. At minimum, they'll be banned from obtaining any federally backed loans for the foreseeable future. I left the bank with a copy of my statement and instructions on what to expect next. The FBI would likely want to interview me, and there would probably be a criminal investigation. The house deal would definitely fall through, and Marcus and Jennifer would lose their earnest money, just as Marcus had predicted. But as I drove home, I realized I felt no guilt about any of it. They had made their choices, and now they would face the consequences. I had spent years protecting them from the results of their poor decisions, but I was done being their safety net. That evening, my phone started ringing again. This time, it was a number I didn't recognize, but when I answered, I heard Jennifer's voice, higher and more panicked than I had ever heard it. Dorothy, thank God you answered. We need to talk. I have nothing to say to you, Jennifer. Please, just listen. There's been a huge misunderstanding. The bank called us today and said there was a problem with the cosigner information. They're saying you denied signing the application. I almost laughed at her audacity. Even caught red-handed, she was still trying to manipulate the situation. There's no misunderstanding, I said calmly. I never signed any application because I never agreed to co-sign your mortgage. But we need you to tell them it was just a mistake, that you forgot you had agreed. People your age sometimes get confused about things like this. There it was again, the suggestion that I was too old and senile to remember my own decisions. The same tactic they had tried to use to pressure me into signing the loan in the first place. Jennifer, I'm going to say this once, and then I'm hanging up. What you and Marcus did is called mortgage fraud, and it's a federal crime. The FBI is now involved, and there's nothing I can or will do to help you. The silence on the other end stretched for so long, I thought she had hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice was completely different. Gone was the fake sweetness, the manipulative charm, the calculated tears. What remained was pure, undiluted rage. "You bitter old witch," she hissed. "You're going to destroy your own son's life over your petty revenge. Is this how you want to be remembered? As the mother who sent her own child to prison?" "No," I replied, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "I want to be remembered as the woman who finally stopped letting people walk all over her." I hung up and immediately blocked their number. But the calls kept coming from different phones. Marcus called from his work number, from Jennifer's cell phone, from numbers I didn't recognize. The messages grew increasingly desperate and angry. They blamed me for ruining their lives, for being selfish and vindictive, for caring more about money than family. But mixed in with the anger was something else. Fear, real genuine fear about what was going to happen to them. The house deal had fallen through, just as expected. They had lost their earnest money. Their credit was destroyed, and now they were facing potential federal charges. 3 days later, I got a call from Agent Rebecca Torres with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. She was professional but kind, explaining that they were investigating the mortgage fraud case and needed to interview me formally. "Mrs. Johnson," she said, "I want you to know that you're not in any trouble. You're the victim here. But we do need your cooperation to build a strong case." The interview took place at the FBI field office downtown, in a sterile conference room that smelled like coffee and disinfectant. Agent Torres was joined by her partner, Agent Michael Chen, and they spent nearly 3 hours going through every detail of my relationship with Marcus and Jennifer. They were particularly interested in the pattern of financial requests over the years, the escalating demands, and the emotional manipulation tactics Jennifer had used. I found myself telling them things I had never admitted to anyone, not even my daughters. The way Jennifer would cry crocodile tears when I hesitated to give them money. The way Marcus would use guilt and family obligation to pressure me into compliance. "Mrs. Johnson," Agent Torres said as we concluded the interview, "I have to tell you, this case goes beyond simple mortgage fraud. What you're describing sounds like a systematic pattern of elder financial abuse. We may want to investigate some of those earlier transactions as well." Elder financial abuse. The term made me feel old and vulnerable, but it also validated what I had been feeling for months, that something about their treatment of me was fundamentally wrong, even criminal. "What does that mean for them?" I asked. Agent Chen answered this time. "If we can prove a pattern of financial exploitation, the charges could be much more serious. We're talking about potential federal racketeering charges, identity theft, wire fraud. The penalties could include significant prison time and restitution." Restitution. The idea that I might actually get back some of the money I had given them over the years seemed almost too good to be true. But more than the money, what I wanted was for them to understand that their actions had real consequences. As I left the FBI office, I felt lighter than I had in years. The investigation was out of my hands now. Justice would run its course, and I could finally focus on rebuilding my own life. That weekend, Patricia flew in from Seattle to visit me. It was the first time one of my daughters had come to see me in over 2 years, and having her in my house filled it with a warmth that had been missing for far too long. "Mom," she said, as we sat in my living room drinking tea, "I have to ask, do you regret turning them in?" I considered the question carefully. Did I regret it? Did I wish I had just signed the mortgage papers and continued enabling their behavior? "No," I said finally. "I regret that it took me so long to stand up for myself. I regret all the money I gave them that I'll never see again. I regret all the years I spent walking on eggshells around people who never really loved me. But turning them in? No, I don't regret that at all. Patricia nodded. Good, because what they did to you was unforgivable, and the mortgage fraud was just the tip of the iceberg. Over the next few weeks, the investigation expanded exactly as Agent Torres had predicted. The FBI discovered that Jennifer had been running similar scams on elderly people in 3 different states, using various family connections to gain access to their financial information. Marcus, they determined, had been a willing participant in at least some of these schemes. The local newspaper picked up the story, running a front-page article about the mortgage fraud case with the headline, "Local Woman Helps Expose Family Financial Abuse Ring." Reading about my situation in black and white was surreal, but it also felt validating. I wasn't just a bitter old woman holding grudges. I was a crime victim who had found the courage to seek justice. The article prompted several other elderly people to come forward with similar stories about Marcus and Jennifer. Apparently, they had approached Jennifer's elderly relatives, Marcus's former employers, even neighbors, with various sob stories and requests for loans that were never repaid. 2 months after that terrible night, when Jennifer told me to hurry up and die, I sat in my living room reading the morning paper when my phone rang. It was Agent Torres. "Mrs. Johnson," she said, "I wanted to give you an update on the case. We've arrested both Marcus and Jennifer on federal charges, including mortgage fraud, identity theft, wire fraud, and elder financial abuse. They're currently being held pending trial." The news should have made me sad. These were people I had loved, people I had welcomed into my home and my heart. But instead, I felt a profound sense of relief. The nightmare was finally over. "What happens next?" I asked. "There will be a trial, probably in about 6 months. You'll need to testify, but we'll prepare you for that. In the meantime, we're working on asset recovery. We've found evidence that they used some of the money they took from you and others to purchase luxury items, jewelry, expensive electronics. We're seizing those assets for restitution." After I hung up, I sat quietly in my living room, looking around at my house with fresh eyes. This space that Jennifer had dismissed as dusty and boring was actually a testament to decades of hard work and careful saving. Every piece of furniture told a story. Every photograph held a memory. This wasn't just a house. It was my sanctuary, my fortress, my proof that I had built a life worth living. The broken teacup was long gone, replaced by a new set of china that Patricia had sent me from Seattle. The living room had been rearranged, with new plants and fresh flowers that I bought for myself every week. The walls displayed recent photos from visits with my daughters and their families, reminders that I did have people who loved me for who I was, not what I could give them. Most importantly, my bank account was growing again. Without the constant drain of Marcus and Jennifer's demands, I was able to save money, invest wisely, and plan for my future with confidence. Mr. Peterson had helped me set up a trust that would protect my assets and ensure that my daughters would inherit according to my wishes, not according to the manipulative schemes of people who saw me as a resource to exploit. The trial was still months away, but I was no longer afraid of it. I would tell my story, speak my truth, and let justice take its course. For the first time in 7 years, I was truly free to live my life on my own terms. And as I sat there in the morning sunshine, streaming through my clean windows, I realized that Jennifer had been wrong about one thing. I did have value beyond my money. I had wisdom gained through experience, strength forged through adversity, and the courage to stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult. Most importantly, I had learned that real love doesn't come with a price tag, and anyone who tries to put one on it isn't worth having in your life. The phone rang again, interrupting my thoughts. This time, it was Susan calling from Denver, just to chat, to ask about my day, to share stories about her children. As we talked and laughed together, I felt grateful for the painful lesson Marcus and Jennifer had taught me. Sometimes the worst betrayals lead to the most important discoveries about ourselves and about what truly matters in life. The weeks leading up to the trial, brought unexpected visitors to my door. The first was Mrs. Henderson from down the street, an elderly woman I had exchanged pleasantries with for years, but never really gotten to know. "Dorothy," she said when I opened the door, "I read about what happened in the newspaper. I wanted you to know that something similar happened to my sister in Atlanta." She came in for coffee, and we spent the afternoon sharing stories. Her sister had been bilked out of nearly $20,000 by a nephew who claimed he was starting a business. Like me, she had given the money freely at first, believing she was helping family. Like me, she had been made to feel guilty when she finally said no. "The hardest part," Mrs. Henderson said, stirring sugar into her coffee, "is realizing that people you trusted saw you as nothing more than a bank account." Word spread through our neighborhood, and soon I was receiving visits from other women who had similar experiences. Mrs. Washington, whose grandson had convinced her to co-sign for multiple credit cards that he maxed out and never paid. Mrs. Rodriguez, whose daughter-in-law had systematically borrowed money for fake emergencies until her savings were completely depleted. We started meeting every Tuesday afternoon in my living room, sharing our stories and supporting each other. What had started as informal visits became something more important. We were a support group, a sisterhood of women who had learned difficult truths about the people we loved. "You know what I realized?" Mrs. Washington said during one of our meetings. "My grandson never called me Grandma when he was asking for money. It was always, 'Mrs. Washington, I hate to bother you, but,' or 'I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important.'" He was distancing himself from the family relationship even while he was exploiting it. I thought about my own conversations with Marcus and Jennifer, how they had become increasingly formal and businesslike over the years, how Jennifer had started calling me Dorothy instead of Mom, how Marcus had developed that cold, professional tone when discussing their financial needs. "They trained themselves not to see us as family," Mrs. Rodriguez observed, "because if they saw us as real people with feelings and needs, they couldn't do what they do." These Tuesday meetings became the highlight of my week. For the first time in years, I was surrounded by people who understood my experience without judgment. We laughed together, cried together, and most importantly, we validated each other's feelings. What had happened to us wasn't our fault. We weren't stupid or naive. We were loving people who had been systematically exploited by those closest to us. 3 months before the trial, Agent Torres called with another update. "Mrs. Johnson, we've uncovered something significant. It appears that Marcus and Jennifer had been planning this mortgage fraud for over a year. We found emails between them discussing your financial situation, your retirement accounts, even your property value. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. They hadn't just opportunistically decided to forge my signature. They had been plotting, calculating, strategizing about how to access my money for months. There's more," Agent Torres continued. "We found a life insurance policy that Jennifer took out on you about 18 months ago. She's listed as the beneficiary." The blood drained from my face. A life insurance policy. On me. with Jennifer as the beneficiary. How is that possible? I whispered. Unfortunately, it's easier than people think. She had access to your personal information through Marcus. She listed herself as your daughter-in-law and claimed it was for estate planning purposes. The insurance company didn't verify the relationship thoroughly. I sat down heavily, my mind reeling. Jennifer had taken out a life insurance policy on me. She would benefit financially from my death. Suddenly, her cruel words that night took on a much more sinister meaning. Maybe you should just hurry up and die already. Mrs. Johnson, are you still there? Yes, I managed. What does this mean for the case? It means the charges are going to be upgraded. This suggests premeditation and a much more extensive fraud scheme. We're looking at potential charges of conspiracy, racketeering, and possibly even attempted murder if we can prove any evidence that they took steps to harm you. Attempted murder. The words echoed in my head long after I hung up the phone. Had they been planning to kill me? Had Jennifer's suggestion that I should die been more than just cruel words spoken in anger? I thought back over the past year, looking for signs I might have missed. The time Jennifer had insisted on making me tea when I had a cold, tea that made me feel worse instead of better. The way she had encouraged me to drive at night when my vision wasn't good, even offering to let me borrow their car, which had faulty brakes. The vitamins she had brought me, claiming they would boost my energy, but which had made me feel dizzy and confused. At the time, I had attributed these incidents to coincidence or my own aging body. But now, viewed through the lens of their calculated deception, everything looked different. Had they been trying to harm me? Had they been hoping I would have an accident, a fall, a medical emergency that would allow them to collect on that insurance policy? The thought terrified me, but it also fueled an anger deeper than anything I had ever felt. It was one thing to steal my money. It was another thing entirely to potentially threaten my life. That evening, I called Patricia and Susan, telling them about the insurance policy discovery. Both of my daughters were horrified. "Mom," Patricia said, her voice shaking with rage. "They weren't just stealing from you. They were potentially planning to kill you. We need to make sure you're safe," Susan added. "What if they make bail? What if they try to retaliate?" Their concern touched me deeply, but I felt calmer than I had expected. The FBI was watching Marcus and Jennifer closely. My house had a new security system. Most importantly, I was no longer isolated and vulnerable. I had my Tuesday group, my reconnected relationships with my daughters, and a growing network of people who genuinely cared about my well-being. "I'm not afraid," I told them, and realized it was true. For the first time in years, I know exactly who I'm dealing with. There are no more illusions, no more false hopes. I can protect myself because I'm finally seeing clearly. The insurance company immediately canceled the policy once they learned about the criminal investigation. They also launched their own internal investigation into how such a policy could have been approved without proper verification. It turned out that Jennifer had used this same tactic with at least 3 other elderly relatives, taking out policies on people who had no idea they were insured. As the trial date approached, I found myself getting stronger rather than more anxious. My Tuesday group had grown to include 8 women, all of whom had experienced some form of financial abuse from family members. We had become each other's chosen family, supporting each other through legal proceedings, financial recovery, and the emotional aftermath of betrayal. Mrs. Washington's grandson had been arrested on credit card fraud charges. Mrs. Rodriguez had successfully sued her daughter-in-law for restitution. Mrs. Henderson's sister had moved from Atlanta to be closer to family who actually cared about her. Each of us had found the courage to stand up for ourselves, and each of us was rebuilding our lives with dignity and purpose. 2 weeks before the trial, I received an unexpected letter in the mail. The return address showed the county jail, and the handwriting was Marcus's. My hands trembled as I opened it, not sure what to expect. "Dear Mom," it began, and just seeing that word, after months of silence, made my eyes well up with tears. "I know I have no right to write to you after everything that's happened. I know you probably never want to hear from me again, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. I'm sorry for letting Jennifer manipulate me. I'm sorry for the things we said to you. I'm sorry for using your name without permission. I'm sorry for everything." I sat at my kitchen table, reading his words, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Part of me wanted to believe his apology was genuine. Part of me suspected it was just another manipulation, designed to get me to drop the charges or speak favorably about him at sentencing. The letter continued. "I've had a lot of time to think about what we did, and I can't believe I let it get so far. Jennifer convinced me that you owed us help, that after everything you had given us, we deserved more. She made me believe that you were being selfish and unreasonable. But I know now that isn't true." He wrote about growing up, about how hard I had worked to provide for our family after his father died. He remembered things I thought he had forgotten. The nights I came home, exhausted from double shifts, the times I went without so he could have what he needed, the sacrifices I made to give him opportunities. "I don't expect you to forgive me," the letter concluded. "I just wanted you to know that I remember who you really are, and I'm ashamed that I let anyone make me forget. You deserve so much better from me. You deserved a son who protected you, not one who let you be hurt. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry." I folded the letter carefully and put it in my kitchen drawer. I didn't know if his apology was sincere or strategic, but it didn't matter anymore. The damage was done. Our relationship, whatever it had been, was over. Even if he truly regretted his actions, even if he had genuinely been manipulated by Jennifer, he was still an adult who had made choices. He had chosen to participate in fraud. He had chosen to stand by while his wife abused me. He had chosen money over family. Some things can't be forgiven, not because the victim is unforgiving, but because the damage is too complete to repair. The trial began on a cold Monday morning in February. The federal courthouse was intimidating, with its marble floors and high ceilings. But I felt ready. I had practiced my testimony with the prosecutors. I had my Tuesday group there for support. Most importantly, I had the truth on my side. Marcus and Jennifer sat at the defendant's table, both looking thinner and older than when I had last seen them. Marcus kept glancing back at me, his expression unreadable. Jennifer stared straight ahead, her jaw set in defiance. The prosecutor's opening statement laid out the case methodically. The mortgage fraud, the forged signatures, the insurance policies, the pattern of financial abuse spanning multiple victims in several states. The evidence was overwhelming. When I was called to testify, I walked to the witness stand, with my head held high. The prosecutor guided me through my story, starting with Marcus and Jennifer's first requests for money, and ending with the discovery of the life insurance policy. "Mrs. Johnson," the prosecutor asked, "when you learned that the defendant had taken out a life insurance policy, naming herself as beneficiary, how did that make you feel?" I looked directly at Jennifer as I answered. It made me realize that to her, I was worth more dead than alive. The defense attorney tried to paint me as a confused elderly woman who had willingly given money to her family and then changed her mind out of spite. But the evidence was too strong, and my testimony was too clear and consistent. "Mrs. Johnson," the defense attorney said during cross-examination, "isn't it true that you gave my clients thousands of dollars over several years without any expectation of repayment?" "Yes," I replied, "because I loved my son, and I thought he loved me. I thought I was helping family. I didn't realize I was funding a criminal enterprise." The trial lasted 3 weeks. Witness after witness testified about Marcus and Jennifer's pattern of fraud and abuse. Other victims told their stories. FBI agents presented evidence of the conspiracy. Bank officials testified about the forged documents. When the jury returned their verdict, I was sitting in the front row with Patricia and Susan on either side of me. "Guilty on all counts," the foreman announced. I felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just a quiet sense of justice finally being served. At sentencing 2 months later, I was given the opportunity to make a victim impact statement. I had spent weeks writing and rewriting what I wanted to say, trying to find words that captured the depth of betrayal and the long journey toward healing. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steady despite the emotion I felt. "For 7 years, I believed I was supporting a loving family. I gave freely of my resources because I thought I was investing in relationships built on mutual love and respect. What I discovered was that I had been funding my own abuse. I talked about the isolation I had felt, the way their manipulation had cut me off from my other children and friends. I described the financial stress of constantly giving money I couldn't afford to lose. I explained how their treatment had made me question my own worth and judgment. But I also want to thank them," I continued, and I saw surprise flash across both Marcus and Jennifer's faces, because their betrayal taught me valuable lessons about my own strength. It forced me to reconnect with people who truly love me. It showed me that I deserve better treatment than I had been accepting. I looked directly at Marcus. "To my son, I want you to know that I raised you to be better than this. I'm disappointed in the choices you made, but I hope someday you'll find the courage to become the man I once believed you could be." Then I turned to Jennifer. "And to you, I want you to know that your cruelty revealed more about your character than it ever did about mine. I survived your abuse, I exposed your crimes, and I will thrive long after you're forgotten." The judge sentenced Marcus to 5 years in federal prison and Jennifer to 8 years, plus restitution of over $40,000 to be split among their various victims. They were also banned from obtaining any federally backed loans for the rest of their lives. As the bailiff led them away in handcuffs, Marcus looked back at me one more time. I saw something in his eyes that might have been genuine remorse, but it was too late for remorse. Some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. Outside the courthouse, reporters wanted to interview me about the case. I declined most requests, but I did speak to one journalist who was writing an article about elder financial abuse. "What would you want other people in your situation to know?" she asked. I thought carefully before answering. "I would want them to know that it's never too late to stand up for yourself. I would want them to know that real love doesn't come with a price tag. And I would want them to know that sometimes the people who hurt us the most do us the greatest favor by showing us who they really are." The restitution money started arriving 6 months later. It came in small installments as the court seized and sold Marcus and Jennifer's assets. Their jewelry, their electronics, their furniture, everything they had purchased with stolen money was liquidated to pay back their victims. I used part of the money to establish a small fund for elderly people who had been victims of financial abuse. The rest went back into my retirement savings, restoring some of the security they had stolen from me. But the real victory wasn't financial. It was the life I had built in the aftermath of their betrayal. My Tuesday group had evolved into a formal support organization that met weekly at the community center. We provided resources and emotional support for other victims of elder abuse. We testified before the state legislature about the need for stronger protections for seniors. My relationships with Patricia and Susan had never been stronger. They visited regularly, and I had become a more involved grandmother to their children. We took family vacations together, celebrated holidays with genuine joy, and talked regularly about everything and nothing. I had also reconnected with old friends I had neglected during the years of Marcus and Jennifer's manipulation. My social calendar was fuller than it had been in decades, filled with activities I chose because they brought me joy, not because they might earn someone else's approval. Most importantly, I had learned to value myself appropriately. I no longer confused generosity with love or financial support with family obligation. I gave money when I wanted to causes and people I believed in, but never out of guilt or manipulation. 1 year after the trial, I was working in my garden when Mrs. Henderson came over with news. "Dorothy," she said excitedly, "I just heard from my sister in Atlanta. That nephew of hers who stole her money, he was arrested again, this time for trying to scam an elderly man out of his disability benefits. Apparently, word got around about our case, and other victims started coming forward. It turned out that our willingness to prosecute had created a ripple effect. Other victims of Marcus and Jennifer's schemes had found the courage to report their own experiences. The FBI had opened investigations into similar fraud rings in multiple states. Our case had become part of a much larger effort to combat elder financial abuse. "We did something important," Mrs. Henderson said, and she was right. By refusing to be silent victims, by demanding justice instead of accepting abuse, we had helped protect other vulnerable people from the same fate. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most end up teaching us the most valuable lessons about our own worth. Jennifer was wrong when she asked what good I was. Without my money, I discovered I had something far more valuable than cash: the strength to stand up for myself and the wisdom to recognize real love from manipulation. Today, I'm surrounded by people who value me for who I am, not what I can give them. And to anyone watching this who might be going through something similar, remember this: you deserve better. It's never too late to say no. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to walk away from people who only see you as a bank account. Your worth isn't measured in dollars, and real family would never make you question that.